Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lorraine Elliott. I'm Professor Emerita in International Relations at the Australian National University, and I'm very pleased to be here for the latest in the book drop series in the Centre for Deliberative Democracy and Global Governance at the University of Canberra. We're here today to talk to 50% of the authors of this wonderful new book called Deliberative Global Governance, and it's been released in the Elements and Earth System Governance series published by Cambridge University Press. And I'm here today talking to Professor John Dryzek and Dr. Jonathan Pickering and Dr. Jensen Sass. Thank you very much for the opportunity to read the book and to be here. John, can I start with you to tell us something about the background to the book, its focus on deliberative approaches to global democracy, and also who the audience is for this book?
Right. We've been working on this book in a way for, or at least the book itself is at least 10 years in the making, because that's the length of time on which people associated with our centre have been working on the topic of deliberative global governance. But in a way, it came together relatively recently within the last couple of years, and when we thought it would be nice to have a very concise statement of the kind of work that we've done and the kind of approach we take to global governance. So all the authors, well, the three of us here today, and then our three co-authors, Quinlan Bowman, Jonathan Kuiper, and Hayley Stevenson, we've all been associated with the centre in some way, either as current members of staff, former postdocs, or in John Kuiper's case, former PhD student. So it is short. It's only 33,000 words. And so we try to cover a lot of ground in that 33,000 words, and we hope to be able to reach quite a broad audience. I think realistically it will be mostly an academic audience, but it would be nice if it does find some resonance in the world of global governance. And I think the fact that it is concise, that it really tries to get to hammer home some sort of key points in very, very succinct fashion will, we hope, mean that it reaches a pretty good audience. It's in the Earth System Governance element series. It's actually the first element in that series, and we were strongly encouraged by Frank Bierman, Frank Bierman and then Arti Gupta are the two co-editors of the series, but it was really Frank who encouraged us to submit this to the series.
Thank you. And one of the things that struck me about the book as well is very much that you do try to actually reach out and make some observations about the translation of these ideas into the institutional space. One of the questions I had is about the role for global civil society, and at various times in the book the comment is made that global civil society is or should be a realm of communication and persuasion, but also a few pages later that it doesn't engage directly with more than a tiny fraction of the world's people. So there's a conversation about public spaces and about empowered spaces, and I'm reminded here also of the work by Jean Grugel and others, Faranak Miraftab, on invited spaces. But you talk in the book particularly about citizens, and that in some ways has a very legal aspect, and I'm really interested in how you use that term. How can we create space then for those who aren't citizens, for those who are most marginalised, who are displaced in multiple ways, not just physically, and so therefore have few opportunities to be part of those spaces, to bring their thoughts, their ideas and their lived experiences to a deliberative process?
Sure, yeah, I think so. And one of the key ideas in the book is the importance of a healthy civil society for generating ideas about global governance and transmitting concerns that people have about the ways in which global governance affects their lives. So a strong civil society, which we sort of situate within within public space, if you like, is a central element of what we characterise as a legitimate global deliberative system. And we identify a number of limitations at the moment with how global civil society works, and one of the important ones, as you mentioned, is that it often doesn't engage with, say, the most marginalised, the poorest of the poor, and so on. So we highlight that the importance, say, of self-organised movements of the poor, of say smallholder farmers like La Via Campesina in Latin America and so on. The importance of those, in addition to some of the more established civil society organisations like Oxfam, Greenpeace, and so on. In relation to the role of the citizen in that context, it's theories of deliberative democracy place a strong emphasis on the role of citizens as participants in deliberation, and so some of the key ideas in deliberative democracy of citizens' assemblies, citizens' juries, and so on foreground the citizen. And a reason for this, and my colleagues want to comment on this, is the idea that that these representative processes, participatory processes, need to go beyond, say, the usual suspects of, say, organised stakeholders and so on, that citizens need to be central to deliberative democracy. Having said that, when we talk about citizens, there is often that assumption, I suppose, that they may well be. Often it's not clear about whether we mean citizens in the formal sense of citizens of a particular country. And there's an example in the book where we talk about the Europolis deliberative poll, which involved citizens from something like 27 of the EU member states. And the deliberation involved issues of migration, but didn't involve undocumented migrants. And so from the perspective of all affected interests being involved in deliberation, then non-citizens need to be involved in these discussions. Perhaps the best way of thinking about it could be that when we're talking about citizens in this context, we're talking about citizens of the world, and not necessarily that that opportunities to deliberate should be limited to citizens of a particular state.
I think that's interesting. It's also perhaps the way in which the language of stakeholders segues into rights holders, for example. We seem globally, in some ways, to be faced, though, with a retreat from deliberation. Now, this might be one of the reasons, of course, that the book is so opposite at the moment. But there seems a growing politics of othering that seems, in fact, to be unable to accommodate difference, and that seems to revert to narrow forms of self-interest and power politics. And I'm mindful, just today, for example, in the Australian context, former High Court Judge and Royal Banking Commissioner Kenneth Hayne is quoted as saying in a speech I think he gave in July that reasoned debate about issues of policy are now rare. Today's High Court decision, or yesterday's High Court decision, about what public servants can do, if you like, outside the space of their job, seems to uphold restrictions on the way in which they can actually engage in those deliberative processes. At a much more local area, residents in areas in South Australia that are being shortlisted for proposed nuclear waste storage facilities have been told that they can only participate and attend community consultations if they agree not to take notes, not to record, that if they want to be observers, they have to be approved in advance. All of this seems to be moving us away from a deliberative process. So where might we look? Should we be optimistic still? Where can we look and have grounds for optimism?
Yeah, I think it's easy to be pessimistic, but we ought to be optimistic. We should have an intellectual and normative responsibility to be optimistic, especially if we're working in the area of democratic theory. And the reasons to be pessimistic, are very many. It would be fair to describe the current era as characterised by another structural transformation of the public sphere. where newspapers, journalism is seriously at threat, and that being one of the most important sites for public deliberation. On the other hand, the reasons for optimism are there as well. There's very strong public demand to engage in public debate, and people are very upset about the state of public debate. So it's not as if people are simply resigned to this situation. There's actually a strong reaction against it. There's also reason to wonder about how polarised politics really is, the degree of polarisation among ordinary people as compared to the representation of polarisation that we see in the press and being pushed by politicians. And I think that there's a pretty sizable gap between those things. I think in a way the spirit of optimism is really embodied in this book, because it's a book which is very squarely problem oriented and takes an optimistic stance in basically trying to draw together all the different opportunities for deliberation that are really realistic in different kinds of institutional settings, and to bring them together in one book to present to otherwise pessimistic readers.
I think that's a very useful place to finish, but perhaps before we finish completely, John, where can people find this book?
Okay, it can be found, well, actually in two versions. Oh, there it is. It's actually thin enough to sort of shuffle. But it can be found. It can be downloaded from the Cambridge University Elements website. So if you just, I think if you Google Cambridge Elements Deliberative Global Governance, you should probably get it. For the first 2 weeks after its publication, it was actually able to be downloaded for free, but unfortunately that's passed. But it's still, I think it's still pretty cheap. And it's available print on demand as well. It probably won't be appearing in bookshops, unfortunately. Although, well, who knows? But that's probably not the place to look for it. So Cambridge University Press website for either the electronic version or the print version.
Can I just add a very brief comment, which is about the space that we're in today. So some of you may have noticed the quite unusual looking submarine-like windows behind us. We're actually in the so-called Futuro at the University of Canberra, which is a building that was designed in the 1960s by a Finnish architect, rather space aged and so on. We thought it might be a rather appropriate spot for thinking about the future of global governance. And when I was just thinking about the space, one sentence in the book just struck me, which said, above all, deliberative democracy is a creative and transformative project that can enlist global publics in the search for a more democratic, peaceful, just and sustainable world. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.